And this one. What's going on here? You know, you don't have notes here, right?
No.
I can leave that there. We're good. Okay. So just make sure that's working. Good.
Okay.
X.
All right.
Yeah, let me get the camera on you.
Okay. For those of you who know me. Those who don't know me, don't know me. I did a fellowship at the Gazelle Institute of Child Development in 1970, 71, and that obviously had a great influence on me. I call myself an optometrist, not any other definition. And so this is not going to be an argument for developmental or for against behavioral or anything like that. It's going to be, this is what I know. This is what I've done for 57 years it'll be this year. They just sent me my 60-year AOA membership plaque. And they got an email and said, we got a misspelling on there. Ignore the one you get. We're sending you another one. But when it said 60 years, I said, ooh, that's a long way. I just started a blog called Riding in Bubba's Lane. You can find that on the OPSIS website, www.reinventingoptometry.com. Go to the news section and it'll say Bubba's blog or something like that. I don't remember. But it's a lot of what I'm talking about today is reflected in there, condensed down, of course. Well, that one didn't work. Yeah, it did. Yeah, I know. Yeah. So it'll pop up in that. If you're trying to see things about just look retinoscopy in there right away or hear me talk about it, I'm setting the stage for that with the background from the developmental aspect, because we're just not ready for that. And just look retinoscopy is obviously not a refractive technique, as those of you who have been here before. It's an observation of behavior. And behavior is dependent on what developmentally the processes they have gone through and have established. Gazelle passed away in 1961. That was 10 years before I got there. He got his, what's very interesting about Gazelle, which a lot of people don't know, they just think of him as a pediatrician. He was first a psychologist, and he received a psychology degree from Clark University in 1906. He found that people didn't understand what he was saying, didn't accept what he was saying. So he said, well, I'll go back to school and get my MD degree, got his MD degree, and that worked for a while. And then the Gazelle Institute of Child Development, well, he established the Yale Clinic of Child Development, and then the Gazelle Institute of Child Development was formed after his grants were suddenly not renewed after publishing the book Vision, Its Development of Infant and Child. I will place no blame on that. And a lot of that got completed through a grant from American Optical Company in the last 2 years of that. I thought, you know, my Holy Bible was Vision, Its Development of Infant and Child, and I found out there's so much more that where he included vision in his writing, going back to the obviously the mid 30s or the 30s in there, and that was just sort of a culmination of what he did. There were somewhat over 10,000 children in all stages of development he tested throughout the years of life. And they were included in books called Infant and Child in the Culture of Today, the child from 5 to 10, 10 to 16, and then of course Vision, Its Development of Infant and Child. And then there's a couple of others I brought with me that I forgot to bring up whenever we were there. One is called Developmental Diagnosis. And we'll see some quotes in developmental diagnosis. You can get copies of that. You can see how worn this one is. Another one is called infant development, and infant development goes along with the cinematography, and some of the comments that are in there are also, you'll hear in the thing. A lot of these things what later came out as Gazelle cycles of development, and they have just been, it was 2010 or 2011, they were revalidated. Obviously not by Gazelle, but by people who were working at Gazelle. And then I did say about American Optical, and then here are the sampling of the books, Vision is Development, Infant and Child Developmental Diagnosis, and Infant Development, you can see up there. But I don't want to go too fast here. There we go. There were many others. So now let's just take a few steps. And what I want to establish is vision is not just about eyes, as we all know. Vision is about everything that's directed and led by eyes. And with Rob, we had a conversation one time, and this was on page 14. So interfused our vision and the action system that the two must be regarded as inseparable. To understand vision, we must know the child. To understand the child, we must know the nature of his vision. And so that becomes important whenever you talk about moving into childhood, moving in even into adulthood, because so many of the actions and reactions that we have in those stages, later stages, were established in the first months to years of life. But we miss the statement before that sometimes, and that statement is, no one of the major fields of behavior, motor, adaptive, language, and personal social is normally devoid of visual content or visual controls. So if we begin to see that, that's how vision leads and directs all aspects of life as we go through, and foundations are set. And I will use the word foundations, but I'm using another word now, and it's scaffolding. We talked about that a little bit last year, but scaffolding is designed to be changed. Foundations are much harder to change, and they're not designed to be changed, but scaffolding is designed to be changed. And that to me is the bottom line of all of that. The child, this was also in there, the child and his eyes reveal themselves co-jointly in outward patterns of behavior. So, that to me supports the fact that vision starts internally and moves outward as we go through life. And behavior is a convenient term for all the reactions of the organism, which are mediated by the neuromuscular system. Again, said by Gazelle, published in 1949, obviously arranged before that. All behavior tends to assume characteristic forms. A behavior pattern is simply a definable form response to a specific situation. So something you have practiced, it's a response, it's an action, and I'm using action towards engagement, not just an action itself, because an action has no real definition. That's an action, but there's no purpose to it. An action towards engagement and with something around them. But it's to a specific situation, and they start practicing, if you will, we use that term, from day one. Not from, they get a certain age or whatever. They start those things at day one, but they're very crude. We can talk about, well, yeah, a lot of it happens in the womb. That's one thing, but we can't do much of an examination until they're born. So I generally talk about kids when they're born, but there are things that can be done there. And I set a default pattern for engagement. And then this is a picture of the laboratory that he used. It was this dome thing where he was inside working with the child, and parents and other observers could participate outside. But they had cameras in there that were doing that. I mean, this was so far ahead of his time and not even thought about at that point in time. And we would think nothing about that. Maybe not even think about the parent hovering over the child as we're doing it. But that was so far ahead of his time. The infant examined in the crib, the dome is encased in a one-way vision screen. And the dangling ring test is for a supine infant around 20 weeks of age or 5 months. The head favors a mid position and the hands move toward the midplane in a symmetrotonic reflex. Before that, then you had the asymmetric tonic reflex. And then they used the ring and the string, and it's a free sitting infant at 36 or 9 months of age. They reach out, they pull the string, which then pulls the ring towards them. And this is a video of a clip at 4 months of age. I've shown this before. I feel like it's something that Skeffington did. You hear it one time and you accept it, then you hear it again and you get so much more out of it, and you hear it again and you get so much more out of it, and you think Skeffington was getting so smart, and really you were the one that was beginning to understand more of what he was saying. So I'm going to play this and then we'll discuss that as we go.
There we go.
The eyes are pathfinders. The infant takes hold of the world with his eyes long before he takes hold with his hands. A 1-inch cube reveals his eye-hand coordination at the age of 4 months. He moves his eyes selectively. He looks from cube to hand, and then back again from hand to cube. His eyes fasten upon the test object, and they maintain a firm grasp. The hands are activated even though they cannot as yet obey precisely.
What?
It is again evident that the eyes have a top priority in the scheme of development. He can reach with his eyes, but not with his hands.
It still had more to go, I thought.
No, that was it.
Okay.
Starts all over. And that quote, he can reach with his eyes but not with his hands, is also captured here in infant development. And he said, you know, the eyes are pathfinders. The thing he said, he can reach with his eyes before he can reach with his hands. So therefore, the patterns that they develop looking with their eyes are foundations or scaffolding for the way they will later reach with their hand and reach in a month later. That's 4 months of age. A month later, 5 and to almost 6, they're reaching down and picking up a block and then picking up another block. And then at 7 months of age, they're banging them together. But again, that visual pattern of looking and engaging has already been established in those early ages. The infant takes hold of the world with his eyes long before he takes hold with his hands. It's again evident the eyes have a top priority in the scheme of development. He can reach with his eyes, but not with his hands. But the embryology of early human behavior is another book that he did, and that correlates with the video, the embryology of human behavior. And so he goes through a lot of things in that whole video. Developmental diagnosis published in 1941. He says, moreover, seeing is not a separate isolable function. It is profoundly integrated with the total action system, with the child, his posture, his manual skills, his coordination, his intelligence, even his personality makeup. And so what we're seeing, and what I understand from that, is the way we develop these patterns of looking, with the way we develop our curiosities, is established early on. Movement. If I'm curious about something out there, I can't just look at it. I've got to then develop these abilities of movement abilities. So it stimulates and organizes that process, movement processes. If those processes are asymmetrical, then that's establishing, the more they do that, that's establishing a pattern of asymmetry as they go through their life. But that reaching and that curiosity of getting out and getting to it. Indeed, vision is so intimately identified with the whole child, we cannot understand its economy and its vision, its hygiene without investigating the whole child. Again, this is 10 years before, or 8 years before vision is development in an infant and child. And there are also tidbits of things in infant and child in the culture of today, which is another book he wrote before that time. Vision is the most sophisticated and objective of all the senses. It gives most detailed report of the outside world, simultaneously registering position, size, distance, color, and form. Well, you know, I think Joel said it's the where, it's the what, it's the identifying all of those kinds of things that vision sets the stage for. And that's on two. But my favorite quote of all is, and I think y'all know, I was doing a workshop in Torquil Rasmussen's office, and he had this book in the office, and I had not seen it before. And I looked at it, and there's a chapter in here on blindness. And I just happened to turn to the page that said, "The infant is born with visual hunger." And I thought, oh my goodness. And the rest, I don't know what happened the rest of that seminar. I don't even know if they understood, because everything was going on in my mind about what it was going on. And the eyes are searchlight antennae, which are constant adaptive movement. And the infant is born with visual hunger. I don't know if I've got that in there or not. What well, we'll back up from that. But he said the infant doesn't start engaging and start waking up until he starts looking. And when he stops looking, he goes to sleep. And so, again, the importance of this process of vision in everything we do in life, but these patterns are established very, very early. And I like the thing, what the infant sees depends on what he does. And I think there are several different things. There's an article that said, you know, we don't look because things are clear. We look to make things clear. And if you think about that, that takes this whole process of clarity first, to me, out of the picture. We got to look first, and as we begin to look, we begin to refine. Well, if from very early on I don't refine enough to accomplish whatever the cultural expectation is, that's going to be a problem, and that's where why we need to start doing things so early. Kinesthetic impressions registered by these eye movements are essential as the retinal impressions themselves, because the retinal impressions in isolation would not supply the data which are necessary for comprehension of the configuration of physical objects. To me, that's huge. The retinal impressions are not nearly as important by themselves. It takes all the other things involved in that to do. Motor data furnished by the eye muscles are soon supplemented by comparable data supplied through prehension and manipulation, and soon therefore after locomotional. That's what I was talking about. You see that your prehensory eye movements, in other words, they're movements with eyes, and they fixate and control and look before you can physically reach and do that. Visual is a social sense as well as an intellectual sense. We look at people and we begin to engage with them, and we see early on how babies look at you. And there's another one called gaze following that I've talked about before, that if the child looks at the parent and sees the parents looking over here and they follow over here, by the age of 12 months, then by 18 months, they'll be able to respond to 337 words. Whereas if they don't follow the parent's gaze, they'll only respond to 194 words. So vision is just so important in developing that social sense, thinking about what are they doing? I'm going to look where they're looking. And so it's just so important in doing that. Must have, that went the wrong way. And then he spoke of blindness, and this developmental diagnosis, it talks about all processes and how they are, where developmental delays come in. And the title of this chapter is on blindness, but the first 3-4 pages are so critical in understanding the process of how vision is so engaged and so much a part of the person we become later in life. And he said, even though the infant is not wrapped in silences, he lives in a world of vision nothingness, which threatens to drive him into increasing introversion as he matures. The organization of his personality is more endangered than his intellectual development. Now, he's talking about full scope blindness. What happens if they're just interferences as they begin, disruptions as they begin to go through life? And he's more concerned about that. Most people don't realize the important window for preventing visual issues is before the age of 3. Not preschool, not kindergarten, before the age of 3. You know, too many people just say, well, we don't want to see them until they can read letters on the letter chart. Too late, too late. Brain is wiring at a pace we never get back. Boom. Because vision is not linear, it's explosive. And Angel Perez put that term on her blog, and I loved it, because if you go back to Gazelle cycles, Gazelle says there's a disruption, and we react and form the patterns and the scaffolding around that disruption. And then there's another disruption, and then there's another disruption. We'll talk about that in a minute. But that disruption is explosive. Think about anything new that you've got. Let's just say a new car. That's an explosion, right? It's so new, and you want to learn everything about it. Well, that's what happened. But the first thing you do, you get in. You don't get in the car and drive and look out there. You get in, you get in the car, and you look around. What's all around here? You bring it all in before you go out. And that's what babies do as they go through life. And so it's an explosion. I can't get rid of it. We can reestablish and redirect at later ages, but it takes more effort. So if we don't get those patterns in some organized fashion early on, then they continue to use those patterns as their default. And using them as their default, yeah, we can change them later through vision therapy, through lenses, through whatever. But many times it's much more difficult because we have to undo things more than doing things. Development is always moving forward and back, but it doesn't declare bankruptcy. And I saw this from LinkedIn. It's I don't know the actual credit. It's not from me, but our brain is not static. It's a living system that keeps rewriting itself. That alone is powerful. And each one of these explosions causes us to rewrite the way we go about doing things. And that's why I call it scaffolding, because it moves. And if you see scaffolding on a building where they're working on it, that's not designed to be a foundation. That's not designed to be solid. That's designed to move to the next thing. Peter Menziuso is president of J&J Vision Global Network, one big title. But he says, and remember, this is a contact lens company, right? Our sense of sight is so precious. It's foundational to how we connect and socialize, how we learn, even our self-confidence. And then in June of 24, he said, and our safety. And if a person from a traditional contact lens company can say that, it's important for all of us to take that up. So I'm going to add actions towards engagement. And again, I'm talking about purposeful, intentional actions, towards engagement as observed through vision expose patterns of action that will be utilized throughout life unless we intervene if they're out of order. These actions such as development, social interaction, learning, earning, social interaction, and safety, I can get that social interaction there a couple of times, are critically dependent on vision. And if we don't have that scaffolding appropriately there, then they're not going to be effective. But these are some bits to come that'll be in my blog. Children show their visual system every minute. We just have to learn how to observe. And I think most of us in this room have learned to observe to a greater degree than the majority of the 40,000 optometrists that practice in the US and probably all over the world. But we have to learn to observe the entrance, engagement, exit from a task or object just presented, and especially during just look retinoscopy. It's that enter, engage, and exit task. With just like look retinoscopy, in addition to major issues, we also look for minor issues that have a cumulative effect. So sometimes people only look for the major issues, but all of these minor issues, because of the patterns and the scaffolding they've put together, have a minor effect. And it drives nearly every aspect of learning. It shapes motor skills, communication, social engagement, cognitive growth. And when vision is delayed, everything is delayed. And I'm going to go, that was from Angel, and I'm going to go even further. Vision drives nearly every aspect of development through life. And when vision is actually looking forward, actively looking forward, development is progressing forward. When vision is holding in the present state, in other words, not moving forward, development is also holding in the present state when the culture may be calling for action to move forward. If we wait till age 3 to start supporting a child's vision and development, we're already behind. Vision development isn't linear, it's explosive. And Gazelle cycles show a much faster turnaround. You know, they go through the disruption, the inwardizing, the putting together, and then the expansion outward. If ever any of those cycles, that they cycle throughout life, but those cycles in the first ages happen at a much greater frequency. Between birth and 3 years of age, you go through that cycle twice. But at 8 years of age, it takes 6 years. So it takes 6 years from age 8 to 8-14 to go through a single cycle. Whereas in the first 2 years of life, then they've gone through first 3 years, 2.5 the early years. First 3 years, 2.5 cycles. So vision must emerge as the explorer, the initiator, the instigator, and the influencer of action. And when early identification and intervention, we have the means to identify and provide appropriate intervention appropriate for the child's abilities and culture. And I think, you know, all of us live in different cultures. Some were talking about parents who just everything is here and everything stays in the local community. Others, they have a worldly view. The cultures are different, and we have to look at what that is. We must identify and intervene as early as possible with scheduled periodic care before minor issues become a disruption that the child cannot manage. So it's important to manage early. It's important to understand that all these things that happen in the first few days of life, to weeks of life, to months of life, impact things that happen, and they form foundations and scaffolding that impact the rest of their life. And so that's why it's so important to be there. And remember, riding in Bubba's lane, if you send comments, they'll go to Paul, and Paul will send them to me. Next issue will be coming out within the next week or so. But I hope y'all find that somewhat interesting. And there's my questions. we wait until age 3 to begin identification and intervention, what have we missed? And we know major vision conditions impact development, but what atypical vision patterns of action might also impact the developmental process? So that's it. Thank you. I'll go back to that.